Hey, good to see you back. I'm Lori, and this is another episode of Fuckery 101. Today goes out to my friend Juan, who took me up on a request to ask me some questions about complicated behaviors that he was seeing at work, and could we play the game Name That Fuckery together. So we're going to be getting to a list of some fuckery that's showing up in his tech company. But before we do that, I just wanted to reference the fuckery deck, which we've talked about in earlier episodes, and that some habits that damage trust are less complicated, less nuanced than some of the ones we'll get to today per Juan's request. For example, this card has belittling, playing dumb, and bitching and moaning. You do not need me to explain what those things are and why you shouldn't do it. Those are forms of fuckery that show up, and if they show up for you, knock it off, try something new. Then, of course, there's a few more from the go to hell pile that I've referenced that could be called the go to jail pile. Included on this card, you've got sexual harassment, blackmail, and extortion. And if you're guilty of any of these things, watching these videos is probably not going to help you out. So avoid those altogether, and you might want to figure out if you want to stay in a company that tolerates, condones, or sanctions any of those forms of fuckery. So for today's episode, we're going to take a look at an email that Juan sent me this weekend. We actually had an opportunity to talk about these questions last week, and I just want to put out there, if any of you are curious about some habits that you see, hopefully in yourself, but also that you see with the folks around you, and you're not quite sure what to name that fuckery, I completely welcome your emails, texts. Just send me a message at lori@RadiusECD.com. That's Radius Executive Coaching and Development. That's what the ECD stands for. And that's referenced down below. Okay, so the first subject that Juan asks about is, what about the tendency to avoid making timely decisions and then later criticizing the decision that was made? So the reason why this is complicated is because it's fusing a couple bad habits together. And I've mentioned earlier that analysis paralysis is one of the flavors of fuckery that I have to own up to, that my own perfectionism can get in the way of making a decision, and that sometimes I can become a bottleneck. And if that shows up for you too, it doesn't matter how sociable you are, how smart you are, if you're not moving ahead on things and actually executing on the actions, your trust and your credibility are going to falter. So that alone, the analysis paralysis or procrastination or stalling, is one part of this fuckery. But in addition to that, Juan described that the way that this tends to show up for him is when there's a group of people that are working together, and the group is needing to make a decision in order to move ahead and meet customer deadlines. And so sometimes the fuckery is not so much an individual one, but more of a systemic one. Because if you don't have a real clear decision-making process, then there's heaps of opportunity for bad habits to show up and get in the way of the action, right? So is there a clear decision process? How will the people involved make the decision? By what date? Who has the authority to make the decision? Is it a single point of contact? Is this by democratic vote? Is this procedural justice? Is one person going to just make the decision and then everyone has to buy into it? What is that decision-making process? And a lot of smaller companies maybe have not formally adopted clear decision-making processes or strategies. Larger ones that I've worked with have, but it doesn't mean that they're followed. So asking yourself, is there clarity around who needs to be informed of a decision, who needs to be consulted as part of a decision, who has responsibility in that decision, and then who's actually held accountable for it. That's a RACI model, RACI, that's used in a lot of project management, and it's one that Radius provides some training on through my friend and colleague Tracy Grotto. But to look at where is there some fuckery showing up in who and how and when that decision is made. That's also playing into this. Then the third part of this is if we're stalling, if there's a level of risk aversion, if there's a level of fear around making the decision, and then it's not really clear who and how we're going to make that decision. That's two parts, right? The third part is when the decision is finally made, what happens after that? Are people complaining that it didn't go the way that they wanted? Are they complaining that they were left out? Are they throwing new data or new information into the mix once it's already been decided upon? I have a number of clients who cite Intel as having this notion of disagree and commit, that there's a time and a place for the disagreement and for the debate, but then once that time is up and the decision is made, everybody involved in that decision commits to following through. And if we don't commit and other forms of fuckery show up, like sulking, like pouting, like sabotaging, like any kind of passive-aggressive communication that shows that you are not committing to the results and the success, all that stuff can show up, right? So you can see that in his original question, this tendency to avoid making timely decisions and then later criticizing the decision that was made, a lot of bad habits that show up there. So thank you for putting that on our radar, and ask y'all to maybe consider where something like that might happen where you work and how you can add more clarity around roles, responsibilities, how decisions are made, when they need to be made, and the expectations for once the decision's made, how are people supporting that? All right, second one, the tendency to always need more data. So here's what I love about this. It's not inherently fuckery. Like many bad habits are not necessarily fuckery. But, it's fair if we want more conclusive information and that we want more data, we want more sources so that we can, move ahead and make a clean decision that's a no-brainer. The problem, I love as Juan says, is when the request for data is a weapon used to sabotage ideas coming from a person you see as a competition for advancement. You keep throwing the sand in the gears until the gears grind down. So let's look at this continuum. When is asking for more data and more information part of doing your due diligence and part of being responsible? And when does your incessant compulsive need for more data become you throwing sand in the gears of a competitor? When is it really about your own fear? When are you using the need for data as a weapon to get in the way of advancement, in particular, the advancement of your own ideas? So thank you for putting that one there for us to consider. I think that a lot of us are guilty for that, and I challenge you to think about when you ask for more data, what is your motivation? And if that's happening around you, to then clarify, okay, Juan, you would like more data in order to make a decision. Is that clear? Or why? What would you do with this data? And how much more data do you need? And when will we know that we have enough data? And is there enough trust in the relationship for me at the end of that meeting to be like, Juan, I feel like the continual request for more data is actually slowing us down. And I'm wondering if we can have an honest conversation about what you're actually needing from me. Okay? So that would be assertively addressing that form of fuckery. And then we're going to do one more today, and then we're going to come back to his fourth one on another episode. And this is the I was not consulted tendency. This showed up one time with a small business that I was working with where the CFO shared at an offsite how frustrated, pissed off he was that he had not been consulted about the new carpet that was laid down in the lobby. And the others on the leadership team were really dismayed because they had no idea that that was something that he valued, felt was important, or needed to be consulted on. So whenever you have more than one person working together, and a lot of you have 50, 100, 10,000 people working with you, there's no way that we can mind read where and when we need to be consulted. Yes, some of our job functions are written out on a job description, but let's be honest, a lot of us don't even have those. That's a different kind of fuckery, right? But what does your role define as necessary for you to be consulted on? Maybe pause this and write that down, right? Like, what decisions, what information, what consultation do you absolutely need to be brought into the room in, right? Like, set a timer for 5 minutes and draft all that out. Then maybe you have a column of, what are things that I would like to be consulted on, but honestly, people can probably move ahead without me, and come up with a list of that. And then can you think of meetings, decisions, choices, committees, teams that you keep getting wrangled into where you're not really sure why you're on the invite list? That these are actions that you do not need to be consulted on. Maybe you need to be informed after the fact, but you don't actually need to be consulted. So can you come up with that list of, people keep asking for my consultation on this and I have no idea why. Come up with that list, right? So it's your responsibility to get clarity around those things. And I think the way that this fuckery shows up is, some of us really want to be involved in everything. And this is pretty typical to show up if we're in a smaller company, or if we are the founder, if we're the CEO, if we're the executive director. Is there too much micromanaging showing up? Is there too much helicoptering showing up? Are we really struggling to delegate? Are we not clear on what our priorities are? If you are someone that struggles with needing to be consulted on a large majority of decisions, you're going to have a really hard time running an effective business and doing so sustainably. So thanks so much for those examples and your requests, Juan. I encourage all of you, if there are bad habits that damage trust showing up where you work and you'd like a name for it, or if you're getting some feedback, you're taking a look in that mirror and you'd like some help putting words to what it is that you're doing that's getting in your way, please drop me an email or send me a message on LinkedIn, and we'll see if we can't talk about that up here and get your questions answered. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time. Take care.